Hey guys, tonight we dive deep into a tale spun from ancient threads and tangled pride. So vivid, so cursed, and so absolutely over the top that you'll wonder how anyone got any sleep in ancient Greece. You're about to walk beside a girl whose fingers wove magic, whose pride stitched a challenge to the gods, and whose fate still creeps along your ceiling in eight-legged silence. Yes, we're talking about Arachne, the mortal who dared to outweave a goddess and ended up as history's first spider. You'll soon see why your cozy little bedtime nest is a better fate than hers. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this myth without a few emotional knots. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the light of early morning in ancient Lydia. Yes, real place, modern-day Turkey, where looms clatter like horse hooves on stone and gossip threads itself through every courtyard. You're not a noble, a soldier, or a priest. You're someone much rarer, a young woman whose talent with a weaving shuttle is borderline terrifying. Arachne's hands blur as they dart across the loom, faster than the eye can follow, faster than rumors about who brought what to last night's feast. The locals call her work divine, and not in the flippant, this hummus is divine kind of way. No, they whisper that perhaps the gods themselves have blessed her, or even fear her. And here's where things begin to unravel. You're sitting on a worn stool, the smell of sheep wool in your nostrils, and the scrape of thread taut against your palms. Arachne's tapestries aren't just good. They're unnerving. They breathe. A bird stitched in blue thread seems to flutter its wings. A deer in bronze thread almost twitches its ear. Even the town elders stop pretending not to stare. Now, in many Greek myths, people get into trouble by stealing fire or ignoring obvious prophecies. Arachne's mistake is more modern, being really good at what she does and having the audacity to not downplay it. She doesn't thank the gods for her gift. She doesn't credit divine inspiration. She says plainly that her talent is hers, and hers alone. That's a bold move in a world where lightning bolts are literal and gods have egos the size of Mount Olympus. Some townsfolk admire her. Others whisper warnings. But Arachne? She just keeps weaving. Spiders haven't even been invented yet, and already she's pushing fate toward its sticky climax. Here's a fun fact. In ancient Greece, weaving wasn't just a household chore. It was a symbol of cosmic order. The fates themselves wove the destinies of mortals. So when a mortal girl starts claiming she weaves better than a goddess, well, that's like someone today saying their blog is more important than the internet. Historians still argue whether Arachne's story reflects real tension between mortal artists and religious authority, or whether it was just a fantastically spooky bedtime story meant to discourage pride. Either way, this myth caught on, and it's about to escalate faster than Zeus at a toga party. In this quiet moment, before gods descend and looms become battlegrounds, you feel the warmth of morning sun on the woven threads in your lap. You smell fresh-dyed linen drying in the courtyard. You hear Arachne's voice, confident, focused, as she hums a tune older than memory. And you think, this won't end well. But it will be beautifully told. You stay close to Arachne as her legend grows, like threads layering across a loom. Her fingers never stop moving, and neither do the whispers. People come from villages miles away, not for trade, not for festivals, but to watch her weave. They stare in silence, mouths agape, as she conjures entire myths into cloth. One tapestry shows Helios riding his flaming chariot across the sky, his horses stitched with golden thread that gleams like sunlight. Another shows Poseidon stirring the sea, each wave catching the light just right. You blink, half expecting the ocean to splash. As crowds grow, so does Arachne's confidence, or arrogance, depending on whom you ask. She begins to say it louder. I learned from no one. Not Athena, not the fates, not any muse. My hands alone earned this skill. Now, this is where even the most unflappable Greek grandmother would clutch her pearls. Athena, the actual goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and yes, weaving, is famously not a fan of hubris. Especially when it's directed at her personal brand. You can practically hear Olympus shiver with tension. And sure enough, the stories say Athena hears of Arachne's boasts. Some claim she disguises herself as an old crone and visits Arachne's home to issue a warning. Others say she thunders down from Olympus in full divine regalia, eyes flashing. Either way, the result is the same. A weaving contest is proposed, Arachne versus the goddess herself. And Arachne? She doesn't hesitate. She nods. Smirks even. Thinks she has this in the bag, like someone challenging Beyoncé to a singing duel at karaoke night. Confidence? Absolutely. Survival instinct? Not so much. A quirky side note. Weaving contests were actually a thing in some ancient cultures. They weren't always mortal versus goddess dramatic, but they were serious affairs. Techniques were judged by smoothness of fabric, intricacy of pattern, and how lifelike the imagery appeared. The stakes, though, rarely included divine wrath. Historians still argue whether this myth is a metaphor for artistic independence or a cautionary tale against disrespecting tradition. Was Arachne a rebel hero, or just reckless? And more importantly, what was it like for a young girl in a patriarchal society to declare herself better than a deity? You don't get much time to ponder. The day of the contest arrives. The long hall fills with onlookers, mortal and perhaps a few in disguise. You sit at the edge, heart thumping, as Arachne sets up her loom opposite Athena. No one speaks. Even the birds go quiet. You hear only the creak of wood and the whisper of thread drawn through tight warp. Athena begins first, her tapestry unfolding a story of the gods' power and mercy. She weaves scenes of Olympus, regal, structured, and glowing with divine authority. Her technique is flawless, her imagery inspiring. It's the kind of work that says, bow before us or else. And then it's Arachne's turn. She weaves a different kind of story, the gods at their worst. Zeus disguising himself to trick mortals. Poseidon causing floods. Dionysus leading mortals to madness. Her images are dark, intricate, and piercingly honest. Each stitch is a critique, a rebellion. Even you feel the tension rise. This isn't art, it's a declaration of war in silk and dye. And the room, already silent, holds its breath. The moment Arachne's final thread is tied, it's as if time freezes. You feel it in your chest, the hush that falls not just over the crowd, but deep into the floorboards, into the air itself. Across from her, Athena stands still. Not a breath, not a blink. You glance between the two tapestries. Both are masterworks. One divine, the other defiant. Athena's woven triumphs sparkle with celestial light. But Arachne's peace. Arachne's tells truths, bold, unflinching, and maybe just a little too honest. The goddess steps forward. Her hand hovers over the mortal cloth, and you can see the muscles in her jaw tighten. She's furious, yes, but not just because Arachne dared to challenge her. She's furious because it's perfect. Every line, every shade, every story thread is technically flawless. The craftsmanship is equal to her own. And the message? Insulting. This wasn't just a contest of skill. This was a mortal using divine tools to air Olympus's dirty laundry. Athena doesn't yell. That would be too human. She doesn't flip the loom or throw lightning. Instead, she tears the tapestry down with one powerful sweep. Silk shreds in the air like feathers, and your heart lurches as the art, Arachne's pride, her voice, disintegrates into fluttering ruin. Then, in one stride, Athena turns to the girl, and she delivers the real punishment. She transforms her. You watch in stunned silence as Arachne shrinks, her limbs twisting and folding, her fingers curling into delicate legs, her body drawing in. A gossamer thread unfurls behind her, and before you can even gasp, she's a spider. Tiny, fragile, suspended from the rafters by the very thread she once commanded. Now here's the quirky bit. Spiders were actually viewed with fascination in ancient times. Greeks admired their intricate webs, often associating them with patience and fate. In fact, the word arachnid literally comes from Arachne's name. Historians still argue whether this transformation was a curse or a weird kind of mercy. Some say Athena spared Arachne death, giving her eternal life through weaving. Others believe it was humiliation, being reduced to a creature doomed to create, alone and unnoticed forever. You, sitting in that stunned silence, aren't sure what to think. Was this justice? Was this cruelty? Or was it something stranger, an acknowledgement from one master to another, that skill comes with consequences? But before you can decide, you notice something odd. A shimmer at the edge of the hall. You blink, and suddenly, the woven world around you is moving. Arachne's tapestry, though torn, seems to ripple. Threads glow faintly, and you're no longer sitting at a contest. You're inside the fabric of her story. Somehow, the myth isn't done with you yet. You step carefully now, the ground beneath your feet no longer solid marble or earth but soft, undulating thread. A landscape made of weaving, each fiber pulsing gently as if breathing. You're inside Arachne's tapestry, though that shouldn't be possible. Still, here you are, standing among golden strands and crimson borders, in a world spun by defiance and imagination. The images Arachne wove begin to animate, like stained glass come alive. Over there, you see Zeus, mighty and regal, but with shifty eyes and wandering hands. You cringe slightly as one scene after another reveals his many disguises. A swan, a bull, a shower of gold, all tricks used to seduce or deceive mortal women. To your left, there's Apollo, radiant with sunbeams, but recoiling when confronted with love that doesn't suit him. Next to him, Poseidon, rising from sea foam, flinging gifts toward unwilling maidens with watery arrogance. Each deity seems less heroic and more complicated. And walking through this gallery of divine misbehavior, you realize what Arachne truly did. She didn't just mock the gods, she held up a mirror. A mirror the Olympians didn't want mortals to see. Here's the quirky part. Some early versions of the myth suggest Arachne wasn't the only mortal who challenged a god. There were others, men and women alike, who dared to compare themselves to divinity. But while most stories end in tragedy, Arachne's is unique for its creativity. She didn't fight with weapons. She fought with thread. Historians still debate whether this myth was intended as a warning to keep humans humble or as a hidden critique of divine authority. Was it propaganda or subversion stitched in silk? The tapestry pulses again, drawing your attention forward. Now you're standing before Arachne, not spider, not girl, but a figure woven entirely from light and fiber. She looks at you, her face expressionless but her eyes deep with knowledge. You want to ask 100 questions, but the threads around you start unraveling, slow at first, then faster, like a dream slipping away at dawn. You reach out, but she lifts a hand. One slender, shimmering finger points up. You follow her gesture. High above, suspended from golden threads, are dozens of miniature worlds, each a web, each glowing. And suddenly you understand, she's still weaving. Even now. Even from the shadows. Because for Arachne, the act of weaving wasn't just rebellion, it was remembrance. She may have lost her form, her voice, even her story in the mouths of gods, but her threads endure. As the tapestry begins to fade, you feel a final tug at your chest, like a goodbye, like a promise. And then you're back. The contest hall is empty. Silent. Only a single strand hangs from the ceiling, swaying gently in a breeze you can't feel. You blink, still unsure if you dreamed it. But wasn't that always the point of myths? The quiet lingers in the contest hall, and though your feet remain planted on the cold stone floor, your thoughts still drift in silk-strung air. Somewhere in the shadows of time, Arachne continues her weaving, unseen but felt, like the tug of an old memory you can't quite name. Now imagine the moments after that final, blinding display. Athena stood silently, her divine presence dimmed, her pride cracked like old ceramic. The room was heavy with judgment, not the dramatic thunderbolts of Zeus, but something more intimate, more dangerous, humiliation. And as any child of mythology knows, gods don't take kindly to that. The transformation came swiftly. Athena didn't scream, didn't summon lightning. She simply reached out with a measured calm, as if brushing dust from her cloak, and cursed Arachne with a new form. Her fingers traced invisible patterns in the air, and before the gathered eyes, Arachne's limbs bent inward, her spine curled, and her once deft hands became spindly legs. You watched the girl shrink, not just physically, but existentially, until the proud human artisan was gone, replaced by something small, crawling, forever spinning. The first spider, according to the myth. Here's a curious side note. Some older texts imply Athena spared Arachne out of admiration, transforming her not out of rage, but as a kind of twisted reward, granting her eternal weaving through an arachnid form. Scholars still argue whether this was punishment or mercy in disguise. Was Athena cruel or poetic? And just like that, the audience vanished. Whether they were real people or metaphors in a god's dream, no one remained to witness Arachne's final moments. Only the echoes of spinning thread, like the distant sound of a harp, lingered. One thread, in particular, trails toward your feet. You kneel to inspect it. It looks ordinary like any spider silk, but when you hold it up to the light, faint images shimmer inside, like a film reel captured in gossamer. Faces of gods laughing. A girl determined. A loom catching fire. It's her story, trapped and retold again and again with every new web spun. You pocket the strand, not because you know what to do with it, but because it feels like the respectful thing to do. As you walk away from the loom and its ashes, the air around you grows colder, quieter. You half expect to see Athena again, poised and unreadable. But instead, the hall begins to shift. Stone walls ripple like fabric. Pillars fade into wooden beams. Light floods in from unseen windows. You're not in the contest hall anymore. You're in Arachne's childhood home. A small, modest space in Colophon. And she's there, young again, weaving by firelight, her mother dozing nearby. No gods. No curses. Just thread, hands, and dreams. And somehow, that moment feels more eternal than all the myths combined. The fire crackles gently beside you, and in this quiet room, modest, sun-dappled, humble, you watch young Arachne at peace. There's no sign of Athena's wrath here, no looming gods with quick tempers and slow grace. Just the rhythmic sound of a shuttle moving through threads, and the occasional creak of wooden beams overhead. You sit still, not wanting to disturb her. She doesn't see you, of course. Or maybe she does and chooses not to react. This feels like memory, or perhaps a dream, a moment preserved in mythic amber. A small life, woven between the grand designs of Olympus. As she works, you notice the tiny details around the room. A clay cup sits half-finished on the hearth. There's a basket of wool dyed with crushed berries, faded reds and purples. On a shelf above her loom rests a small figurine of Athena, carved in olive wood. Its edges are worn from years of being touched, prayed to. That's the part that sticks with you. Before the contest, before the defiance, before the transformation, Arachne respected Athena. Idolized her even. It was that admiration that first fueled her art. Not arrogance, not rebellion. Just devotion. That eventually turned too honest. Historians and poets still argue whether Arachne truly sought to offend, or whether she simply couldn't help but depict what she saw. The gods, flawed and cruel, glorious and flawed again. Maybe she believed truth was a form of worship. Maybe the gods didn't see it that way. Arachne pauses at her loom and glances out the window, sunlight brushing her cheeks like golden thread. There's a small smile playing at her lips, not the smug grin of a future challenger, but the quiet joy of someone who simply loves what she does. You wonder how many threads she's woven today. Dozens? Hundreds? And then a breeze stirs the air, and with it, the room begins to shift again. Colors fade. The soft clack of the loom becomes distant. You're being pulled forward in time, past the contest, past the transformation. Now you're outside, in a forest. At first, you don't understand why. Trees tower above you, their leaves a canopy of shifting greens and golds. Birdsong filters through the air. And there, suspended between two branches, is a spider's web, immense, symmetrical, glistening in the morning dew. You step closer. The web is unlike anything you've seen. It's not just strands, it's a story. Woven through each radial arm and spiral loop are images, figures, faces, events, told in the universal language of symmetry and silk. Gods and mortals, punishments and pride, heroes and mistakes. It's breathtaking. You crouch beside it, watching as a single spider, tiny brown, legs precise, moves along a broken thread, repairing it with deliberate grace. A fringe detail here. In ancient Greece, spiders were often seen as omens of fate, the weavers of destiny's threads. Long before Arachne's tale, their webs were metaphors for the interconnectedness of life. One twitch, one tear, and everything else trembles. And scholars still question, was Arachne's punishment truly a fall from grace, or was she elevated, made immortal in a different form? Did she lose her humanity, or did she gain something the gods couldn't destroy? Her purpose? You watch the spider work, its legs flicking in time to an invisible rhythm. It never hesitates, never stops. There's no bitterness in its movements, only craft. Skill. Memory. You realize then, Arachne is still weaving. Not as a woman punished, but as a creator eternal. And every web, every strand, is a whisper of defiance and beauty. The breeze shifts again. The trees blur, and the forest begins to dissolve, as if drawn back into the threads of its own creation. You stand once more at the threshold of myth and memory, the echo of a shuttle still drifting in your ears. You find yourself back among stone streets and marble columns, the echo of your footsteps bouncing between quiet walls. This time, the city feels different, less vibrant, more hushed. Like Athens itself is holding its breath, waiting for something, or remembering something it wishes it could forget. The tale of Arachne, though born in the threads of myth, left impressions beyond storytelling. Whispered among weavers, echoed in workshops, discussed in hushed tones where mortals dared to ask, what if the gods were wrong? You stroll past a weaving school, where girls bend over looms, their fingers nimble. A teacher moves among them, correcting postures, adjusting tension, murmuring encouragement. But the name Arachne never crosses her lips. It doesn't have to. The myth lingers in the silence between clacks. Some say the story served as a warning, a cautionary tale to keep mortals humble, especially women. After all, Arachne's defiance was twofold. She challenged a goddess, and she did it with her craft. Dangerous on both counts. Even centuries later, this made people uneasy. You pause near a painted wall, a fresco barely clinging to the stone, weathered by time. It depicts Athena in full armor, spear raised, gaze stern. Next to her is a blurred figure, bent in a contorted shape. It could be Arachne mid-transformation. Or it could be someone else entirely. That's the thing about symbols, they shift like shadows. There's a quirky footnote here. Did you know that some later artists secretly painted Arachne into their works? Hidden among patterns, subtly included as a spider tucked into the corner of a ceiling or a woman with thread wrapped around her arms. Like an inside joke for those who knew her tale. And yet, historians still debate whether the myth of Arachne was entirely punitive or partially redemptive. Was the transformation a mercy? A way for Athena to preserve Arachne's genius, even while punishing her pride? Or was it simply divine ego cloaked in metaphor? You wander through the agora, that ancient marketplace where ideas once crackled louder than coins. Here, philosophers debated everything: ethics, beauty, power. Some might have argued that Arachne's tale represented the struggle between mortal truth and divine control. Others, perhaps, simply saw it as a reminder to know your place. But even that idea feels outdated as you move past stalls selling dyed fabric, woven baskets, and rough-spun cloaks. Because here's the twist: people kept weaving. Women and men. Generations of them. Despite the myth, or maybe because of it, and with every warp and weft, they remembered her. You enter a shadowed portico now, and something catches your eye. A small tapestry hanging above an arch. It's new, modern even, with bold lines and brilliant colors. But its subject? A young woman standing before a goddess, holding up a tapestry filled with gods behaving badly. You smile. She's still weaving. You stroll onward, your pace unhurried, the streets quieter now, as if the city itself wants you to keep listening. Maybe because the tale of Arachne doesn't end with a single thread snapped, or even with her 8-legged transformation. No, her story seems to ripple outward, showing up where you least expect it, like spider silk in moonlight, delicate but impossible to ignore. You pass through a small courtyard where vines creep up cracked columns, and in the center sits an abandoned loom. It's more symbolic than practical now, its wood warped, its last threads half-woven and frayed. But it reminds you that weaving was once considered divine, not just in myth but in daily life. A literal act of creation, patterned from chaos. And that makes what Arachne did even more radical. She didn't just create art, she told the truth through it. Her tapestry was no polite homage. It called the gods out, exposed them, made people uncomfortable. That's dangerous territory in any age. Historians still argue whether her tapestry truly depicted the gods' misdeeds as an act of rebellion, or if it was a desperate plea for honesty in a world ruled by power. Was she trying to shame the divine, or remind them of their own humanity? If gods could be cruel, then maybe mortals could be brave. You imagine her fingers, calloused from the loom, selecting each colored thread with purpose. Not to flatter, not to appease, but to show something real. That might have been her real offense. There's a quirky twist in all this. Spiders in ancient Greek culture were sometimes symbols of fate. The moirai, the fates themselves, spun threads of life and destiny. So when Athena transformed Arachne into a spider, was she punishing her or elevating her? Giving her a new kind of power, one not bound by gods or looms. You crouch beside a low wall, overgrown with moss, and notice a tiny spider spinning silently between two stones. Its movements are precise, patient, relentless. There's no drama in it, no fanfare. Just the simple, unstoppable act of weaving. In that moment you get it. Arachne didn't die. She multiplied. Quietly. Everywhere. In every artist who tells uncomfortable truths. In every woman who dares to be brilliant without permission. In every hand that picks up thread and dares to say, I see the world differently. So you stand, brushing off your hands, and keep walking. Past murals of gods, who look a little more human now. Past shrines where incense curls into the sky. Past doorways where laughter and argument spill into the street. Arachne's voice is still there, whispering in spindle whirls, dancing along weft and warp, humming through each stitch in defiance and dignity. And if you listen closely, if you stay very quiet, you might just hear the threads tighten. Because even silent stories find a way to be told. You step through an archway, and find yourself beneath a stone ceiling painted with faded constellations. A gentle breeze rustles the curtains of a forgotten temple, and for a moment, time slips backward. You're not just listening to Arachne's tale anymore. You're inhabiting it, wandering its threads like a dream you don't want to wake from. By now, you've noticed how woven imagery keeps showing up everywhere. Threads, webs, even fate itself imagined as a spinning wheel. It's as if the universe insists on being understood through textiles. And in this fabric, Arachne isn't just a character. She's a metaphor, a challenge, and perhaps a kind of mirror. You pause beside a cracked fresco showing Athena with her shield and spear, eyes stern but thoughtful. She looms large, both literally and figuratively, over Arachne's story. It's easy to paint her as the villain, prideful, jealous, punitive. But there's more going on, as always. Historians still argue whether Athena's wrath was truly personal or merely divine protocol. Was she defending her status, or upholding sacred boundaries between mortal and god? Some scholars suggest the contest between Arachne and Athena wasn't just about skill. It was about the rules of storytelling. Who gets to tell the truth? And what happens when the truth offends power? In this dim temple, where incense long since burned out still seems to scent the air, you imagine their duel not as a fight, but as a desperate attempt at understanding. One weaver, immortal and burdened by divine reputation. The other, mortal and ablaze with raw talent. Neither willing to bend. A fun little footnote. Ancient Athenians held weaving in such high regard that public officials often supervised temple textiles. That's right, government commissioned loom work. So the idea of a weaving contest wasn't just mythic, it echoed real civic importance. You picture Arachne's tapestry again, the defiant images of gods behaving badly, rendered in breathtaking detail. It's the kind of work you'd hesitate to look at, but couldn't tear your eyes away from. Bold, dangerous, honest. Her truth was a thread too bright to go unnoticed. And Athena? Maybe she saw something in that tapestry that shook her. Not just the insult, but the accuracy, the unsettling precision. Maybe she recognized herself, both in the art and in the artist. And maybe that's why she struck. Because sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones we see reflected in someone else. You find a worn bench and sit down, staring up at the ceiling's constellations. How many people told this story over the centuries? And how many changed it, softened it, sharpened it, spun it to suit their needs? The tale of Arachne, like all myths, is a living thread. It stretches from loom to scroll, from whisper to epic. And you're part of that thread now, whether you meant to be or not. So sit a little longer. Let the wind rustle those old curtains. Let the echoes of looms and whispered stories wrap around you like a soft, woven shawl. You're not just walking through myth anymore. You're wrapped in it. You drift from the echoing temple back into the quiet of the mortal world, your feet touching worn stone floors where olive leaves skitter in the breeze. The tale continues to unfold, not just in myth, but in memory, in debate, in the soft whisper of history that refuses to be silent. And here comes the part you've been waiting for, even if you didn't know it, the unraveling. Arachne stands before her tapestry. Her fingers are raw, her breath shallow, her eyes alive with that tremble of triumph and terror. She's finished. The weaving is perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfection that demands reckoning. Athena steps forward, radiant and rigid. Her gaze schemes the threads, and the silence tightens like a noose. You hold your breath, too, even though this isn't your story. But it is. All stories are. Especially the ones about truth and punishment. Athena doesn't say a word at first. She doesn't need to. Her face twists, not just with anger, but with something more dangerous, recognition. This tapestry shows the gods, herself included, as flawed. Vain. Petty. Cruel. No thunderbolts. No triumphs. Just quiet, damning clarity. Now here's your cheeky historical side note. The ancient Greeks had a word for this kind of truth-telling through art, parrhesia. It meant bold, fearless speech. Speaking truth to power. But in a society where gods had tempers and reputations to protect, that kind of honesty came with consequences. So what does Athena do? She rips the tapestry to shreds. You flinch. You really do. The violence is sudden, senseless, symbolic. Threads snap. Colors blur. The labor of days, maybe weeks, lies in tatters. Arachne gasps, as if the breath has been torn from her lungs too. It's not just cloth that's ruined, it's her identity. And this is where it gets complicated. You'd expect a goddess to strike her down, right? To hurl thunder or curses, or some dramatically divine fury. But Athena, in a move that still divides scholars, does something different. She touches Arachne. Gently. Pityingly. Then, in what feels more like transformation than punishment, she turns the girl into a spider. Yes, this is the infamous end, or beginning, depending on how you look at it. Arachne's body shrinks. Her limbs multiply. She becomes small, quick, silent. A weaver still condemned, or perhaps blessed, to spin her art forever from silk. Historians still argue whether this metamorphosis was mercy or malice. Was Athena granting Arachne immortality of a sort, or silencing her in the most ironic way possible, forcing her to weave endlessly in obscurity? And here's a curious cultural twist. Spiders, in some ancient contexts, were symbols of patience and creativity. In others, they were omens, nuisances, reminders of decay. So was Arachne's fate a curse or a sideways compliment? You imagine her now, in a darkened corner, crafting a web that glints in the moonlight. Not for applause, not for praise, just because she must. Because that's who she is. Because weaving is how she breathes. And somewhere, in the celestial stillness, Athena watches. Maybe she regrets. Maybe she doesn't. But the thread between them remains unbroken. You step back from the scene, and feel that thread tug at your fingers too. Not silk, not wool, but something quieter, more insistent. The kind of thread that links stories together across centuries. Across cultures. Across you. The fire inside your mind dims slightly, embers glowing with questions that won't settle. Was Arachne truly wrong? Was Athena truly just? Or are myths like webs themselves, sticky, complicated, impossible to grasp without getting caught? You won't find answers tonight. But maybe that's the point. You sit with that image for a moment longer. The spider in the corner, spinning threads of defiance or sorrow, maybe both. The air around you still feels thick with Athena's final judgment, and Arachne's slow, silent acceptance of her new form. But time, as it always does in these myths, moves forward like a slow ripple across woven fabric. And with that ripple, stories begin to spread. You hear it whispered first in Lydia, the city of Arachne's birth. Market vendors lean closer as they pass the tale from one stall to another. Children reenact the moment Athena appeared in disguise, their arms gesturing wildly, eyes wide with delight and fear. Elders shake their heads, arguing over whether the goddess was justified or too harsh. Then the story sails across the Aegean, drifting to distant shores. In Athens, poets recite verses by torchlight. In Sparta, warriors laugh and swear they'd have dared the gods too, though probably not in such an artistic way. The myth of Arachne takes on a life of its own. And here's something you'll love. Ancient vases have been found depicting a young woman seated at a loom, with a small spider in the corner. Scholars debate whether that's truly Arachne, or whether it's a symbolic nod to her transformation. It's the kind of detail that blurs the line between historical record and artistic license. Modern researchers still debate the origin of the tale itself. Was Arachne a cautionary invention? A way to warn young girls not to rise above their station? Or was she a hidden heroine, a symbol of truth-telling and artistic courage in a world ruled by the egos of the divine? And then there's the fascinating little fringe theory. Some scholars suggest that the story of Arachne predates Athena's involvement entirely, that she may have been a local weaving goddess herself, absorbed into the growing Olympian pantheon. In this version, the punishment was a theological reshuffling, Athena asserting dominance by rewriting the myth in her favor. You sit with that possibility and feel a quiet, delicious unease. What if the gods weren't just characters, but colonizers of story? What if Arachne's fall was really a conquest? The threads continue to unravel in your mind. Back in the longhouse, or temple, or cave, or wherever these stories are told, you can almost hear the loom creaking again. Even transformed, Arachne's work doesn't stop. And that's perhaps the most human part of her tale. She wasn't trying to rebel. She wasn't reaching for glory. She was just trying to be the best at what she did. And that, it turns out, was enough to shake Olympus. It's worth noting that many ancient myths about hubris, human arrogance in the face of gods, end in destruction. Think of Icarus, or Niobe, or poor Pentheus. But Arachne's ending lingers differently. She doesn't die. She changes. She adapts. And she keeps creating. You feel a certain kinship with that idea. How often do we spin our webs unaware, or all too aware, of the greater powers watching us? How often are we asked to silence our truths, to unmake the things we've woven from honesty and skill? There's something uncomfortably familiar about her fate, and yet comforting too, because she endures. Not as a cautionary footnote, but as a constant presence in the corners of rooms, the edges of ceilings. Tiny artists with silk on their fingers. And let's not forget the irony. While Athena's temples have crumbled and her worship has faded, Arachne's children are still everywhere. Every time someone brushes away a web or marvels at its intricate pattern, the myth breathes again. So the next time you see a spider, don't reach for the broom. Pause. Look. Appreciate. You may just be looking at the ghost of a weaver who dared to challenge a goddess, and survived. You lean back, eyes tracing the quiet geometry of a spider's web in your imagination, radial threads pulled tight, glistening with dew or memory. The myth of Arachne continues to reverberate, not just as a tale of divine rivalry, but as a thread woven through centuries of art, literature, and thought. It's strange how something so ancient still clings to modern walls like silk. From the earliest Roman adaptations to Renaissance retellings, Arachne's story persisted, mutated, embellished, but never forgotten. Ovid's Metamorphoses gave her perhaps the most enduring voice, immortalizing her transformation with both sympathy and subtle caution. His version, tinged with poetic melancholy, framed her not as a villain, but a victim of divine insecurity. Renaissance painters loved her. Velázquez, for instance, turned her myth into layered visual metaphors. In his painting The Spinners, also known as the Fable of Arachne, he depicted ordinary women at their looms, with the myth playing out subtly in the background. It's almost like a visual echo, Arachne's defiance stitched quietly into the edges of a respectable scene. And here's a strange little tidbit. In the 17th century, some European naturalists started naming new spider species with nods to Arachne. The myth crept, quite literally, into science. Even Carl Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy, couldn't resist weaving mythology into biology. Historians still argue whether this cross-pollination of myth and science was intentional reverence or just poetic branding. Was it a subtle rebellion, scientists inserting culture into cold classification, or simply a love of metaphor? Either way, Arachne became more than a myth. She became a symbol, a touchstone for conversations about women's artistry, divine power, punishment, and truth. As centuries turned, feminist readings emerged, reclaiming Arachne not as a cautionary tale, but as a proto-artist. Scholars began to frame her weaving not as hubris, but courage. The audacity to speak truth through craft, to reflect the flaws of those in power and stand by it, even if it meant exile, even if it meant transformation. You imagine her now, not curled in fear, but patient, watchful, her many eyes blinking slowly as the world finally begins to understand. It's worth reflecting on just how rare this is. Myths change, yes, but rarely do they evolve from punishment into pride, from silencing into celebration. Arachne's tale is one of those few narratives that has been slowly unspun and rewoven by modern hands. Today she's been resurrected in novels, poems, operas, and academic essays. Writers and artists return to her web again and again, drawn to its paradox. The woman who told the truth and paid the price, but who never stopped creating. And there's something deeply modern about that, isn't there? That tension between expression and consequence. Between brilliance and backlash. Between daring to see the world clearly and being punished for it. Imagine her now in a gallery, not as a cautionary statue turned to stone, but as an installation. Threads stretching across walls, each strand shimmering with defiance. Tourists walk beneath, eyes wide, unaware of how close they are to something ancient and alive. It's not just about spiders anymore. It's about the way stories twist and spin, the way truth often gets tangled in who's telling it. Remember the earlier debates about whether Athena acted out of justice or jealousy? That conversation still echoes in modern classrooms. Professors pose the question, students argue, and the myth breathes again. That's the magic of these stories. They don't end, they echo. So as you settle further into the hush of night, consider how many webs have been spun since Arachne's first thread. In books, in songs, in whispered retellings by candlelight. Each one is a continuation of her work, a reminder that the loom never really stopped. You might not notice it in the rush of daytime, but late at night, when the world quiets and the corners grow soft with shadow, that's when her legacy stirs. A thread here, a thread there, always weaving, always watching. You sit quietly, your thoughts tangled in thread, literal and metaphorical, as Arachne's legacy continues to stretch far beyond her own myth. There's something undeniably sticky about her story. It clings, winds itself around different eras, adapting to the minds and moods of whoever picks it up next. Let's drift into the realm of language. The very word arachnid comes from her name. Every time someone flicks away a web in their garage or flinches at a spider skittering across the floor, they're echoing her myth without even realizing it. That's some serious brand power. Myth turned etymology turned everyday vocabulary. And it doesn't stop there. In Greek, the word Arachne simply meant spider, but post-Ovid, it gained a deeper, more tragic association. Now it's impossible to separate the creature from the woman, who defied the gods and was punished for her brilliance. Not many characters can claim to have become an entire biological class. Here's a quirky detail. In some rural folklore, especially across Eastern Europe, spiders are considered sacred precisely because of Arachne's myth. Killing one indoors was said to invite bad luck or divine retribution. So yes, next time you reach for a shoe, remember you might be swatting ancient symbolism. Historians still argue how directly these superstitions connect to the classical myth, or whether they evolved independently through the centuries. Did tales of Arachne quietly spin their way into everyday rural beliefs? Or did different cultures just happen to give spiders their eerie, mystical status? Whatever the case, her web reaches places even scholars can't quite trace. In modern literature, Arachne often makes cameo appearances, sometimes as metaphor, sometimes reimagined entirely. Poets adore her. Novelists reshape her as a rebel, a saint, even a misunderstood villain. Margaret Atwood once referred to the myth in a poem as the woman who told too much truth, and honestly, that might be the best summary yet. You picture a thread, golden, humming with power, snaking its way through library shelves, winding from Ovid to Atwood, from Homer to horror fiction. It's a testament to how myth doesn't die. It simply reweaves itself in different genres. And not just in words. In film and theater, Arachne often appears in unexpected forms. Maybe it's a spider-woman lurking in the shadows of a dark fantasy. Maybe it's a fierce weaver challenging fate in an indie production. She's flexible like that, able to slip into any narrative that involves rebellion, artistry, or uncomfortable truth. Imagine her as a digital artist now, manipulating light and code instead of wool and loom. Her creations would still be sharp, still speak truth, and still, perhaps, offend the powerful. Some patterns never change, and that's part of the power of myth. It's not locked in marble. It breathes. It creeps. It evolves. Remember that weaving contest from earlier? That moment of pure, fearless creation? That's what artists still chase. That one moment where craft and courage collide, and something undeniable is born. You start to notice how Arachne's story overlaps with other myths, too. There's Prometheus, punished for stealing fire and giving it to humanity. Or Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. All three dared to step beyond their mortal station, and were struck down for it. But Arachne is different. She didn't reach for divinity. She simply matched it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made her story sting the most. She didn't steal anything. She just dared to say, I can do this too. No wonder it stuck. As your eyelids grow heavier, consider how many quiet rebellions have been inspired by this ancient thread. How many truths have been spoken, how many tapestries woven, how many women have dared to create despite being told not to. Her web may have unraveled that day, but the story spun from it never stopped weaving itself into our world. And now you're part of it, too. Just by listening. Just by remembering. So lie still. Let the silk wrap around your thoughts, not to bind, but to soften. To cradle. Because the story isn't over. It never is. You feel yourself floating now, gently tangled in a web of thought that stretches across centuries and across cultures. Arachne's tale, though rooted in ancient Greece, resonates far beyond its origin, woven into stories around the world that explore what happens when mortals confront divine power, when artistry becomes defiance, when truth gets punished simply for being told too well. Let's head east for a moment. In Japanese folklore, there's the Jorogumo, the binding bride spider spirit. She's often depicted as a beautiful woman who lures men in before revealing her eight-legged form. Her story, like Arachne's, blends creation and danger, femininity and power, and a quiet, creeping fear of what lies beneath beauty. Two cultures, two webs, eerily similar threads. Or consider Anansi from West African tales, a spider god of wisdom and storytelling, full of trickery and cleverness. While Arachne is a cautionary tale, Anansi is a celebration of outsmarting the powerful. Still, they both highlight the spider as more than just an insect. It's a symbol of intellect, language, and creation. Historians still debate whether these parallels are coincidental or hint at a deeper, shared human archetype. Are we all just spinning the same stories in different dialects? Or does something about the spider, its web, its silence, its patience, resonate in our deepest fears and dreams? Back in the Mediterranean, even post-Arachne, spider imagery lingered in art and superstition. Byzantine mosaics depict intricate weavings, some scholars argue, as silent homages to her tale. In medieval Europe, nuns wove elaborate tapestries of saints and miracles, their needles echoing Arachne's rebellious loomwork, except theirs praised the divine, while hers had challenged it. Fast forward to the Renaissance. Artists like Titian and Velázquez revisited the myth, often painting Athena's victory in rich color and heroic scale, but always giving a sliver of sympathy to Arachne's plight. You can see it in the shadows, the folds of cloth, the downward tilt of her face. Even victors seem a little unsure of their righteousness when faced with such beautiful defiance. Quirky fact, in a few rare paintings, Arachne is shown mid-transformation, half woman, half spider, her limbs elongating, her eyes multiplying. These images aren't horror, they're almost reverent. They suggest a different interpretation, not a punishment, but a rebirth. You lean into that idea for a moment. What if becoming a spider wasn't the end, but the beginning? A new form for a new kind of storyteller? One who spins not with words, but with silk. The idea glimmers for a second, strange, comforting, maybe even true. And let's not forget the science. Modern entomologists often marvel at spider silk. Stronger than steel by weight, elastic, light, nearly invisible. Nature's original engineering miracle. Imagine if Arachne had access to today's lab coats and microscopes. She'd probably patent half of biotech before lunch. Or maybe she'd just weave the whole lab into an art installation that critiques capitalism. The irony isn't lost. What the gods cursed became one of the most fascinating and studied substances in the natural world. It's as if the universe itself couldn't help admiring her work, even after her fall. You start to notice something quiet, too. All the people through history who have felt like Arachne, those who challenged systems, who spoke inconvenient truths, who created fiercely and were silenced for it. Whistleblowers, artists, activists, teenagers painting murals in alleyways, grandmothers quilting protest slogans into blankets. They all spin threads of resistance, of identity, of survival. Remember that firelight from earlier? The place where the story began, with a loom, a challenge, and a goddess's glare? That fire is still burning. It never went out. It just moved, from hearths to galleries, from whispers to web pages. And yes, even here, in your headphones, as you drift closer to sleep. The story of Arachne is many things, a warning, a tragedy, a symbol. But most of all, it's a mirror. It asks, what will you weave with the threads you're given? So rest now. Let the web hold you gently, not as a trap, but as a cradle. A story doesn't end just because the words stop. It lingers, waiting for someone else to pick up the thread and begin again. You breathe slowly now, wrapped in the final threads of Arachne's tale, threads that shimmer with meaning, memory, and mystery. The fire has faded to soft embers, the loom has fallen silent, and the goddess has stepped back into myth. But Arachne remains. Her figure lingers in shadowy corners of history, not quite banished, not quite embraced. She is both warning and inspiration, her legacy caught in a liminal web of interpretation. For centuries, people have argued over what she symbolizes. Was she arrogant, foolish to challenge the gods? Or was she brave, a proto-feminist artist refusing to apologize for telling the truth? Historians still argue whether the myth was meant to glorify divine power or to subtly critique it. In some early versions, Athena is portrayed not as wise and just, but as jealous and cruel, almost unworthy of her pedestal. In others, Arachne's fate is softened, her transformation presented as a way to preserve her talent, not destroy it. Perhaps even gods understand the power of story and need to make sure the best ones endure. And endure it has. You may not notice it, but echoes of Arachne's weaving ripple through literature, art, and popular culture even now. Fantasy novels where women spin fate. Science fiction tales where artificial intelligences create intricate virtual worlds, digital webs. Modern graffiti that challenges power structures. Fashion runways that use thread and cloth to say, "This is who I am, and I won't be silenced." A quirky modern footnote, NASA named a region on Venus Arachne because of the web-like fractures seen in radar images. That's right, her name now marks a celestial body, a spider queen etched into the face of a planet. She's literally written in the stars. You can almost hear the threads stretch across time. As the loom fades into memory, you revisit that moment, the challenge, the weaving, the judgment. Arachne didn't just create a tapestry. She created a protest, a mirror, a masterpiece too perfect for the gods to bear. And yet it endured. And now you carry a piece of it. Not in silk or color or pattern, but in thought. In the quiet space between sleep and wakefulness where imagination stretches long and slow. In that liminal pause where you realize myths aren't just old stories. They're living blueprints of how we think, dream, rebel, and make meaning. So as the room around you dissolves into the softness of night, imagine the loom once more. Imagine fine threads spinning in the air, guided by nimble fingers. Imagine a young woman who refused to bow, who saw injustice and wove it, thread by thread, into a tapestry that sang with truth. Then imagine the silence after. Not the silence of defeat, but the calm that follows a storm. The breath between movements in a symphony. The peace of knowing that even in transformation, even in punishment, something of her remained. Now feel your breath deepen, your thoughts slow, your muscles melt into the mattress beneath you. Here it comes, the wind down. The fire, now only embers, casts a final orange glow. You can almost hear the gentle hum of spinning wheels, the whisper of silk across fingers, the rustle of ancient cloth. Around you, the night stretches quiet and calm. Outside, stars drift across a dark sky, untouched by myth or time. You let the story wrap around you like a warm blanket, every thread stitched with meaning. There's no rush, no noise, just the soft rhythm of your breath and the lingering magic of a tale well told. You are safe. You are still. You are somewhere between dreams and dawn. Let Arachne's story fade gently now, like distant thunder after the rain. Let the web dissolve, not into fear, but into rest. Let the night carry you, slow and sure, into a deep and restful sleep. And if tomorrow you wake remembering even the faintest thread of this tale, may it inspire you to speak boldly, create fearlessly, and always, always tell your story with care.